Hey, and welcome to the Ambitious Bookkeeper podcast. I'm Serena Shoup. I am a CPA and mom of three, and I'm running a virtual bookkeeping business mostly from my home. You're in the right place if you're a bookkeeper, accountant, or an accounting student, and you know that your purpose is bigger than sitting in a cubicle. If you're ready to learn some actionable tips and strategies to help you start and grow a bookkeeping or accounting business, I hope you stick around. Welcome back to the Ambitious Bookkeeper podcast. Just like I do every time I have a guest, I'm going to say this is a super duper special guest, but this one, like for real, really is because this is my sister. So hopefully you'll be able to differentiate our voices as we speak.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, because even our own parents can't. But anyway, this is Rita. She is a formal social worker and relationship therapist turned coach. And I'm bringing her on today to talk about friendships and navigating that through being an entrepreneur and being in an online business or working virtually. And I'm super excited to have you here. So welcome. And if you'd like to kind of give your own, like who you are and how you help people, that would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I'm super excited to be here having this conversation. I am really super passionate about deeper connections and helping people foster those deeper connections, specifically women who are entrepreneurs. We live in a world where a lot of us feel lonely or disconnected. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. And so I help women and entrepreneurs kind of build those stronger relationships, whether it's new connections or older connections that they want to deepen.
Yeah. Before we hit record and we were kind of talking about like where to take the conversation, we started talking about like the challenges with in-person friendships when you're so used to doing everything online and doing things virtually. And I know a lot of my listeners are in that like online space or working virtually at home by themselves, maybe with kids, but it's very different than being in an office with other adults. And yeah, it's kind of interesting because I made the comment of like, I've actually created some really deep connections through my business and meeting people online, which is interesting. And maybe is because I'm an introvert and it's like easier to like get over that awkward getting to know someone stage when it's all virtual. I don't know. Maybe I'm totally off base there, but I've even taken like those friendships in person. Like if people have listened for any amount of time, they know my friend Alyssa, who's the workflow queen. And we met on Instagram through a common hashtag. And we both serve the same audience, the same, customers and clients. And we've met in person multiple times now. And it's almost like I've known her forever. But how can someone like that is kind of struggling to build relationships in person, like craving that, start to find ways to do that when they are like, kind of isolated in the online world? If you have a suggestion on that or.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to say that like, I think that you're really on point with the idea of like being an introvert, and that's sometimes making it harder. There can be a lot of things going on like internally in our minds, right? That like the in-person space feels a lot more vulnerable, and vulnerability is hard, but like really necessary for us to have strong connections that are like really have a lot of emotional depth to them. So that in-person bit is pretty important. And I have like a couple of key things. One is we have to make time for it, right? Like it has to be a priority, and being honest with ourselves about how much of a priority it is, and really like carving out the time, right? Put it on your calendar, make it an appointment, make it something that is a non-negotiable. And then from there, looking at like the kinds of activities that are going to help foster those connections. So obviously we want to have friends that we have something in common with, but it doesn't have to be everything in your life, right? It could be one hobby. So one of the things that really helps build stronger bonds faster is when our endorphins get triggered, right? We want to like boost our endorphins. So something where you're, say, exercising, it could be taking a walk, it could be taking a hike, it could be a yoga class or a dance class, something like that. Those kinds of things can be really helpful if you're not into the physical activity kinds of hobbies as much. It could be something that you volunteer with or some other way of getting your creativity flowing, right? So it could be something artistic. Maybe it's a wine and paint night or some other kind of like craft class, right? Like there's a lot of, I don't know how often this happens in like smaller places, but like a lot of bigger cities have like nature conservancies or conservatories and museums and different things where you can like take a class and learn how to do something that's more crafty. And anywhere that you're going where there are going to be other people and you're engaging in some kind of activity together can help sort of break the ice a little bit.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah. So those are kind of my two initial tips that come up.
Yeah. I think those are really good ones, especially for like those of us that do work from home alone and maybe used to work in an office and had like office friendships. And now it really makes sense, like why those bloom, because you're all there, like kind of for a common purpose or, you know, and when you don't have, like, you don't really have that going, then yeah. So the thought of going to like, for me, the thought of just going to a like paint and wine night or a whatever, basically by myself makes me like want to throw up. Like I've definitely gone to those things, but it was with like a friend that I'd already established and we went together. So like, I'm getting better though. Like I have gone to some networking events by myself and stayed. So like it is possible for people if they're like me, but it takes a lot of like, I have to like hype myself up, like leading up to it for a while and like plan out that whole day to make sure that I'm in a good like mindset to be going to the thing.
Right.
Sounds
Yeah.
really
like,
ridiculous, but
not at all. So like, I mean, I consider myself to be an extrovert. Like I really thrive when I'm around a lot of people, but I also have days where the idea of like going someplace by myself where I don't know anyone and like trying to engage with people feels a lot harder, right? Or like I'll kind of freeze up in terms of conversation, and like that's normal, I think, for all of us depending on what's going on, right? If I'm feeling insecure about something about myself, that's going to permeate a lot of social interactions that take a little bit more energy to engage in, right? So I mean, it doesn't have to be going to a class where you don't know anyone. Maybe you invite someone who's just an acquaintance.
yeah.
Maybe you've never really had like a lot of conversation with them, but you've got, I don't know, a neighbor who's got kids the same age as yours, right? Or another parent that you've met through your kid's school or something like that, right? Maybe there's someone that you know through church or something like that. And they seem like someone you might want to get to know, just taking that initiative to ask, hey, there's this thing happening. Would you be interested in going along with me? And then you have a familiar face.
Yeah.
And if you're working on some activity that you don't have to be engaged in conversation the whole time, that takes off a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. I love that. So one of the other things that comes to mind right now is, as we talk about doing things in person and like the world is opening up and there's like more networking events and things like that, I have obviously, like, I've been participating in some locally, and like I have on my schedule to go travel to some, which I'm a little bit nervous about, but for the most part, I choose the events where I will at least know somebody there. So I think that's a good strategy. Just like you said, even though I don't know them well, they're like an acquaintance, and we can kind of like, at least I'll have a familiar face. And then I heard something or read something recently. It was probably like, I don't know, someone's LinkedIn post, but it talked about like being the first person to like give the compliment or to like talk to somebody in the room. And I've always been that person, like, and I learned this too at a retreat that I went to, where the host was actually like, I'm an introvert, so like I want to make sure that everybody here like has somebody to talk to, because I'm that person that will walk in the room, and if everyone is already mingling and talking, I will like just hide in the corner. So I was like, okay, so I just need to find the other person that's hiding in the corner and be the first person to talk to them. But that's one of those things that like you have to be intentional about. Like that's not my first, like, that's not natural for me to be the person to start the conversation. Like I'm always the quiet person in the room, where like the extrovert befriends me and then introduces me to all of their friends.
Right.
But I wanted to like bring that up because it's a really like, it's one of those things that, yeah, there's going to be things that are going to be uncomfortable that you do have to be intentional about, but you're not going to be the only person that is nervous or the introvert. So if you can just go look around the room and find the other person that isn't talking to anyone and go talk to them, that's a really good strategy too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a skill, right? It's a skill to learn, to take the initiative, to find ways to start conversations that actually end up being a conversation and not just a couple of like 1 or 2 word answers, right? Like that small talk is easy and low cost, which is why we engage in it. But I don't know anyone who honestly enjoys small talk, right? Yeah. Some people will be very outspoken about hating small talk, but there are ways to kind of ease into a conversation. You don't have to jump right to like, I don't know, tell me all of your deepest fears, right? That's just way too much. But sometimes it can feel that way when we're getting to know someone new. It can feel like any little bit of opening up will feel just as risky as telling our deepest fears. And so just kind of cultivating that skill of vulnerability and taking the initiative. And one thing that I think is often really helpful is to remember that on the whole, we vastly underestimate how much people will like us. Like it's a self-protective thing, but that's one of the natural ways that our human brain works, that we will expect that people won't like us. And we're usually underestimating that a lot. So trying to kind of go into a situation, reminding yourself that actually most people are probably going to like you just fine can be really helpful. And then practicing, taking that initiative. The other thing that is really important is like there has to be some consistency, right? Like it's harder to build and maintain a friendship if we are not seeing each other or interacting with each other on a very regular basis. And there's some really fascinating research. Actually, I love to like dive into the research on the human brain and sociology, but there's some really fascinating research about like how many people we actually need to have in our really close inner circle to thrive, right? To serve as like a protection against depression, anxiety, to be able to, grow as humans. And that's 3 to 5. Like some of those could be family members, but 3 to 5 is kind of the sweet spot for those friends who are your like ride or die, right? You can call them up when you're having a rough time and they will listen. They can be a shoulder to cry on, that sort of thing. But it takes time to build that up.
Yeah.
And there's like a certain number of hours of investment in like interaction that tends to correspond to that. But one thing that I think is really interesting is that if we're focusing on the right kinds of activities and conversations, we can kind of speed that up a little bit. So if it takes somewhere between like 20 and 40 hours to turn someone from like a casual friend to a good friend. So that's hours of time that you're spending together interacting, and then 100 or more to go from like a good friend to a best friend. If we only see each other once a week, that's a lot of weeks, right?
Yeah.
And if it's spread out too far, it can like take even longer. So if that time is happening more frequently, it can build up faster. Like I think about like friends that we made in school, right? We saw each other all the time, right? A good 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for months on end, going through similar experiences. And all of those things can be kind of like a pressure cooker to build friendships quickly. Yeah. But that gets a lot harder when we're adults and we have our own families and we have work, and that takes up a lot of time. So focusing on those things that are like, get your endorphins going, having certain kinds of conversations.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And it like reminds me of the times I've moved cities. It's taken like a couple years to find like a local close friend and be at that like status where you feel like you can tell them almost anything. And so like for those of us who like have moved around and stuff, like just keep that in mind. Like the longer you wait to try to find a friend, the longer it's going to take to have that like best friend status. I'm like, I wish I would have known that a lot sooner.
Right. No, totally. Yeah. I've thought about that too. Cause I've also started over with friend groups, right? Either by moving cities or having other major life changes that have just kind of totally changed my social group. And it's very normal for it to take a couple of years after moving to like really feel established. But then I've thought about when I've had to change my social circle and get close to people, like the things that have been the most helpful for that are not just the regular time, like going to, maybe something that's weekly where we're able to spend time with each other, but being very intentional about becoming friends. Like I've had some really good friends who have either I've done this or they've done this, where they've said, let's be friends, right? Like the first meeting, right? Maybe we're having some conversation and it's like we're clicking on some level. And that just very intentional statement of like, let's be friends, let's hang out again, and then making a plan right then to actually get together. And I think that just like takes off a lot of pressure too, when you have the understanding that the other person is actually interested in trying to build a friendship. And it's helped a lot to do that kind of thing. I've also gotten like, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that reminds me of like in kindergarten, like sitting next to somebody, her name was Alicia, and like we were jiving or whatever. And I think she asked, she was like, let's be friends or let's be best friends. I'm like, that's such a kindergarten thing. But like, sometimes you need somebody to like say that to make so just, that it's like a thing.
Right. Yeah. Like there's so many doubts that can go through our minds, right? Where we wonder, like, does this person actually like me? Like, are they, whatever it might be, we can have a lot of doubts. Yeah. So having that very intentional practice, right? And so like being intentional about the kinds of activities that you're going to do. We need to have fun, right? So maybe there's like a game that you can play together. Maybe there's even like a low cost of entry sort of activity could be watching a show that's got comedy in it, right? Like whether it's like a Netflix stand-up special that you're watching together or like a sitcom or something, right? If there's some show that has comedy in it where you can laugh together, like laughing together and like being able to be playful, like that's super important. We need that in our friendships, in addition to the more serious conversations where we're catching up on life, where we're self-disclosing about how we feel, the kinds of thoughts that we have, you know, whatever like struggles that we might have, and then showing like attention, affection, love, right? So that's one of the reasons that being in person can be so important to maintain a friendship, even if most of the time you don't live in the same place, right? Like having once or twice a year where you can get together, because we do little things like touching each other on the shoulder or the arm, right? Or a hug, hello and goodbye. And like that physical contact will also activate our endorphins.
We'll be back after a quick break.
This episode of the Ambitious Bookkeeper podcast is sponsored by my brand new free training, The Ultimate Guide to Creating a Profitable Bookkeeping Business. In just 1 hour, you will learn 3 keys to creating and launching a profitable bookkeeping business. We will map out your path to creating a bookkeeping or accounting business that keeps you in control of your time, priorities, and expertise. From someone who built a 6-figure firm on part-time hours. That's right. You can stay in control of your time, keep family as your priority, and serve your clients well. It just takes a little strategy up front, and I'm going to help you with that during this free training. So head over to the show notes to sign up now for the next training and find out how you can choose the work you do, kick imposter syndrome to the curb, use tech to be super efficient, which all leads to a profitable business. Just head on over to ambitiousbookkeeper.com/training, and I will see you there. Yeah. Yeah. So how does this, someone might be listening and be like, oh, what kind of podcast did I just tune into? I thought this was a business podcast.
Right.
So I probably should have asked this question at the very beginning, but like, why
That's
is
fine.
this, like, why, I mean, I've kind of alluded to like, especially if you're in the online space, like why this is important, but like, why is this important for entrepreneurs? Like, aren't we just supposed to like be successful and make money and work all the time? But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, like we definitely live in a culture that like pushes that, right? But I think most of us who are entrepreneurs or trying to break into that space of being an entrepreneur do it because we want more freedom and balance in our lives. And we recognize that we can't just be working all the time. We're social creatures, like that's what it boils down to. We're social creatures, and our own mental health is really highly dependent on having like positive connections with people and having that like depth of connection we need. And honestly, like we can grow so much more in terms of our mindset and our capacities to do the things that it takes to run a business when there's not a part of our brains that's stressing out because we don't have the close connections that we need. So I don't know, I kind of thought about this ahead of time about like what's different in terms of friendships for entrepreneurs, right? So like one thing is that we have particular like values and mindset, and we've got to have at least one friend who has a lot of those similar kinds of values and mindset.
Yeah.
Even if they're not an entrepreneur themselves, having like a similar kind of mindset towards like personal growth and individual like capacity to do or create something.
Mm-hmm.
we need to have someone who can be that cheerleader for us, right? The one who's going to encourage us when we're overwhelmed by all the things that we have to learn, all the new skills that it takes to run a business. The one who can like serve as an inspiration. I've thought about, like, I've had friends in the past who are not necessarily entrepreneurs, but they have like volunteer projects or something that they're working on, and just kind of seeing the way that they apply that mindset to something, or like keep going with something that's important to them, is often an inspiration for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've had, like, whenever I have a really close friend, I feel way more confident in myself, right? And so like it gives us confidence to have those close bonds. The other thing is, yeah, just having someone that you can laugh with, having the concrete support. We can't actually literally do everything ourselves, even though we often try. And we're a lot happier when we have people that we can lean on for things. Like, it's not always possible to have a friend do certain things for you. And so like the example of moving comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of times when I've moved where I've just reached out to my network, my friend group, and said like, hey, I'm moving on this day. Like, can you all come over and help me like load up the car, load up the truck, right? And like, I'll buy pizza and drinks and whatnot. And having people come together to help with that does so much more than the practical aspect of getting things moved from one house to the next. Like, I could pay movers to do that. And for a lot of us, like, that might be the right choice at a particular point in time, right?
Yeah.
But making the choice to like ask friends for help with something that you could potentially pay someone for is sometimes one of the best things that you can do, not just for yourself, but for your friends and for the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Like, some of us have a really hard time asking for help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually something that I have put a lot of intentional work into, and I still struggle with it, like, internally.
Yeah.
More than anything, but like I still struggle with it, asking for help, because of, whatever ideas I have about what it means about me if I ask for help. And I think the one book that I read that was like a really big turning point for me around that is called The Art of Asking. It's by Amanda Palmer, who is a musical artist. She was part of the Dresden Dolls.
Okay.
I have no idea if any of your listeners would know that, but yeah, anyway, she wrote this book. So it's like kind of it's a memoir, really, but she talks a lot about, she has this one line in there that I'm going to botch because it's been a while since I read it, but it's something about like asking for help is like a gift to the other person.
Yeah.
And if you like turn it around and think about when you've been able to do something for someone else that you care about, how good does that make you feel? Right?
Yeah.
Like, we want to be useful and we want to be helpful. So it's actually kind of a way to give other people that opportunity to feel that. And it can be small, like you can start with small stuff. I recommend it, actually. Start with small things.
Honestly, like, that's kind of like moving us into like almost like a boundaries conversation. And I know you had that on your like list of topics. And so I think I want to dive into that, because I know I'm working one-on-one with one of my students, and like, if you're listening, I hope you continue to listen. But like, we talk a lot about like boundaries. And I think that you wouldn't expect that asking for help is like a boundary, but it is, because you're asking, you're stating what you need. And that's a boundary in itself, which you may or may not, like, some people may not realize that. But I think that's like one of the first steps in being able to establish like other boundaries, is being able to identify like what it is that you actually need or want, and saying so to
Mhm.
somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have some like research and tips for navigating boundaries and stuff. So do you want to dive into that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, this is like super relevant to business, right? To entrepreneurship. Um, like we have to, first of all, cultivate that self-awareness of what our capacity is. And I feel like this is something that comes up a lot in entrepreneurship, and especially when you're like new in that scene, or like it's a new business, right? You could be an entrepreneur and have like sort of dabbled in that in different arenas.
Mm-hmm.
Because our capacity is not the same from day to day, and we tend to think of ourselves as like either always being capable of our maximum and then judging ourselves by that, or only being capable of our minimum. And then like that can trigger a lot of shame, right? And cascade into like self-doubt and these other things that get in the way of having a business. So like this is one area where that sort of mindset work is important for everything, everything in our lives, not just business, but also the friendships. So like knowing, being able to evaluate what my capacity is from day to day, and then communicating that where it's needed. So that might mean asking for, like, say if you have an employee, right? Maybe you have a virtual assistant or somebody, asking for a little bit more that particular day, or asking for help with something, or to like work together on shifting the priorities for the day, and being able to communicate clearly when you don't have the capacity to do something that someone has asked of you.
Yeah. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're like, especially if you know that you're capable of doing it and you just don't really have the time, or it's something that you enjoy doing or want to do, but you still don't have the time, like navigating that is really hard. Do you have any like tips for something like that? So say someone comes to you and they're like, I have this project that I'm working on. I think you would be perfect for whatever part of it. And it's like totally in your wheelhouse. You enjoy doing it. You are good at it, but you like literally don't have the time. What should you do?
Yes. Yeah. So first off, I think it's totally okay and important to practice the skill of asking for time to think about it before responding.
Yeah.
Because under pressure, we're likely to cave to something that we think is going to like save the relationship, whatever it might be, right? Just like we don't want to upset someone or disappoint them. So asking for time, or just if it's via email, don't respond right away.
Yeah.
Set a reminder on your calendar to respond in like 24 hours or 2 days or something would be the first. So it's interesting that you bring this up, because I'm going to use a personal example. This literally just happened to me in the last week, where I was approached by a friend who is also a social worker and is currently still in practice in therapy, about running a workshop in a summit that her agency is doing that would provide continuing education credits for other therapists. And this is something that I've done a lot over several years. Like here and there, I'll run a program that provides continuing education for other mental health professionals. And the topic was one that I've also done before. I've done it live, I've done it online, like for different groups. It wouldn't require me to make a lot of adjustments. It's something that I do enjoy. I just wasn't sure if it was going to fit in with everything that I have going on. And so I took some time. I took some time to kind of think about it and evaluate. So this is kind of step 2 after taking some time, is evaluate what your values are and like what you're like what's important to you in that moment or in the near term, right? Over the next, say, like 2 or 3 months, what your priorities are and whether that ask fits in with those priorities and how well it does. And again, this is where like the cultivating that self-awareness comes in. We're not always going to be perfect at it, but so in my case, I took some time to think about it and I thought, okay, well, I can do this. But then I had to start thinking through how much time would it actually take me to prepare this? Because the last time I did it was over a year ago. I'm going to have to make some modifications to my materials. And how much time and effort is that going to take away from other things that are a priority in my life right now? How might that affect me? Kind of letting myself think through what that would look like so that I could tap into how does that feel internally? How will that actually impact being able to stay on track with my other business goals? Or for me, like maintaining good, strong connections with my friends is super important. So is that going to tap into time that I would have been able to spend with friends or to spend with my daughter? And so like that process might take a while, right? Like, I'm not going to claim that like it's going to be just like an hour long or less decision, like, but we get faster at it the more practiced we are. And kind of sitting down with yourself regularly to evaluate like what your values are and your priorities and how they rank. We don't think a lot. Like, this is something that I do in my coaching, is help people to identify their values and priorities and how they rank with each other. And that's not necessarily static. That can change from, one day or 1 year to the next. But there are certain points in time where if we have 2 different values that are really important to us that are competing in a particular moment, we may have to decide which one takes priority in certain situations. Yeah. And then communicating that, right? Like, we can just kind of like, I don't know. I'm a big fan of writing out what I'm going to say first and kind of trying out different versions of it if I'm like nervous about how it's going to come across. And if you want to keep the doors open, right, just say something like, thank you for thinking of me or for the opportunity. It is something I enjoy. That I don't have the capacity for it at this moment. Keep me in mind for the future. I'm just kind of taking that from like the email that I sent back, right? That's sort of what I did, was just sort of acknowledge the positives and just very clearly state like that, it doesn't fit in with my calendar right now, or it doesn't fit in with my current capacity. Yeah,
those are really good tips. So take time to think before you respond. I'm taking notes. And then like evaluate them against your goals, your values and priorities, and whether or not it fits at that time. I really like the idea of like listing out or, frequently sitting down, maybe like at the beginning of the month or once a quarter, and kind of looking at what you have, as your priorities or goals, or like what's coming up and what you might have to shift. Like, there's always going to be some sacrifices, but it really helps to take the time to do that kind of planning, just so that when things like this do come up, you're not like caught in people pleasing and then later on resenting that person or whatever, because that's pretty much what happens if you make a decision that's not in alignment with your goals and priorities or values. You will regret it and resent things.
Right. And that's going to come up, right? That does happen, and we have to work through it and make some shifts. And so like something that that's actually something that came up for me. I think the last time that I agreed to do one of those workshops was in that period of time where literally everything was online because of COVID, like things weren't happening in person anymore. And I think it was also at a time when like I didn't have regular childcare because of that. And I remember thinking as I was going through the process of preparing the workshop that I had, like updating it, by the end of it thinking, I have put in way more time into this than I thought I was going to, and it doesn't feel worth what I'm being compensated.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt so stressful. And I thought, I'm not going to do this again. And I forgot about that for a little while. So I'm glad that I took the time to respond and really think through, like, how would that look now? How would that look differently? Just like actually going through a visualization of sort of step by step what it might look like. And that's one of the best ways that we can kind of prepare for challenges that we have, right? Whether it's solely interpersonal or whether it's through business, and we have, you know, other people that we're interacting with even for business. So learning those, practicing those skills is pretty important.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're about at time. So can you share, like, where's the best place for people to connect with you? We'll have all of this linked in the show notes, of course, but yeah, where would you like people to connect with you if they're interested in finding out what you have going on?
Yeah. The best place right now is probably my website, ritahalleveldcoaching.com. And I am also on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm not very active on socials yet. That may or may not change, but I'm trying to like honor my own internal capacity and not take on too many things at once. So yes, I can also be found at Rita Hallaveld Coaching on Facebook and on Instagram. So stay tuned there. Like I'll make announcements too on socials when I have new products and stuff. I've got some free stuff, like a sort of an audit for your inner circle that's available for free, which I think you said that'll be linked in the show notes.
That'll be in the show notes.
And from there, I've got kind of a follow-up 1-hour workshop if folks want to get like a little bit more help with that, or kind of take that to the next step and sort of create their own customized plan for improving their inner circle. And there's a discount code for your listeners to be able to enroll in that for free.
Awesome. Thank you.
If they would like to do that, and that'll give you like a little bit of a taste of kind of what I do. And I'm always open to, you know, people asking questions if they want to work with me. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, sis.
Yeah, thank you.
Been fun.
It has been fun.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who helps make this podcast possible. Content and interviews are produced by me, Serena Shu. Our intro and outro music is written and performed by my brother, Ian Gilliam. Editing is also by Ian using his awesome sound engineering skills along with Descript software. Hosting and publishing is by Buzzsprout, and you can check out the show notes for links to all of these amazing resources and resources mentioned in the episode.
Embrace ambition.